Arc Raiders had released their January update that came along with a bit of content for players to experience, including 2 additional Mark III augments, a map condition, and a few other things. But when we look towards the future, obviously we have bigger updates on the horizon, including the February Shrouded Sky update that's our closest addition to us now. Along with the entire scope of the escalation updates in the coming months, there's also the mentioned new gameplay items, which can be a number of things, but also weapons. Weapons haven't really been touched much since November and the introduction of Stella Montis and the Aephelion. That goes for things like weapon additions, and even things like the overall economy and balance of weapons. Recently, Arc Raiders design director Virgil Watkins sat down with GamesRadar and talked about this topic among many others. Today we're taking a look at the upcoming and future plans for things like how weapon balance, tuning, and economy can and likely will be adjusted, the prospect of higher tier loot exclusive raids, and quality of life additions that can make managing your inventory a breeze so that you're not spending nearly as much time in menus, but rather spending that time topside. Drop your thoughts as we go along, drop a like if you guys enjoy the video, and make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with all things Arc Raiders. I'd love to have you in the community with so much more on the horizon, but for now, let's get into it. So, Embark has, in the last few weeks, been doing a ton of interviews in media talking about the game further that's been super insightful. In an article over on GamesRadar entitled Arc Raiders Dev Dives Deep on Plans for Bigger Updates, Changing Expeditions, and Learning from the Best and Worst in Players. We got quite a bit of insight here out of this about things like weapon economy, plans for future content, raid types, quality of life options, and a lot more. You've probably seen some quotes and soundbite level coverage of this over on other socials, but the full article itself is genuinely really insightful. But one of the topics that was discussed touched on the current meta of the game that you'll find. Doesn't matter if you're looking at it from the lens of PvP or PvE. It's still a present, for lack of a better term, dilemma surrounding weaponry. The lowest cost weapons thrive while many hold back from using those higher tier weapons. This comes down to a number of different factors. First, straight up, some of the weapon balance on the cheaper weapons. Like, it's just so much less expensive in coins or resources to craft, upgrade, and then potentially lose that you feel like you're not risking a whole ton. Then comes the balance of those weapons, still being incredibly formidable in things like PvP or in taking down arc enemies. For example, Stitcher 4s are way cheaper than things like a Tempest 4 or Bobcat 4, and in the right hands, can perhaps even be deadlier given the scenarios if, even straight up stat-wise, it may not be the better gun on paper. The Anvil is relatively easy to craft, or you can purchase them from Tianwen and then upgrade it, and it's way more versatile compared to, say, a Batina 4 and its cost to craft and upgrade despite being the proclaimed best statistical gun for arc takedowns. So this is where that imbalance that many are aware of comes into play. So in relation to that, it was asked, there's this perception that rare and epic guns are expensive to use and upgrade, and make you question how much better they really are. Are you looking at those weapons, either making them cheaper to upgrade or stronger to justify the cost? That's where Virgil Watkins replied, oh, 100%. A lot of the original intent, and I think this intent is good, is that any given weapon in capable hands should be capable of winning a fight if you're playing smartly. And I think that has to remain true, but I think we're definitely a bit off on some of the cost to benefit ratios, certainly on those higher weapons. It was trying to follow a curve of, by spending more and more money, you're gaining an edge. Not a clear one, like I'm using a purple weapon, therefore I win this fight, period. We don't want that. Cost should not inherently fill a skill gap or a tactical awareness gap. We do want people to be excited to get a Tempest or a Bobcat, so if they're way undershooting how people feel about that, then that'll take some adjustment. It is interesting though. This is where the data side is fun when compared to the sentiment. The Batina is a good example. We did an adjustment to it, but even before the adjustment, it had the highest PvE damage output of any weapon. It could shred drones very effectively, and then we tuned it. That only got better. But that's where the perception versus practical reality comes in. And then, how do you navigate that? And that is very much a valid question. How do you navigate that? According to him, it'd be a mixture of rarity adjustments or recipe adjustments. He said it could be both. If it comes to pass that, as an example I'm making up right now, we like the nature of what the Bobcat is, but it's performing at this bracket, then we may consider moving it up or down, and, later on, filling that niche with a different weapon. I don't think that we're precious about where they sit on that spectrum, so if it makes sense to buff it to live up to the implied potential, or if it makes sense to drop the rarity so it stays where it is because it's performing that role well, then we'll do that. So the first thing to know is that this is likely a long-term thing here. Like, this isn't going to be something they turn around within the next week and drop the Bobcat down to just a blue rare item or something like that, but rather it might be something we see later on down the line when we start to see these larger introductions of more weapons. At the moment, grand scheme of things, when you think about how many weapons there are per category, how many there are per rarity, and what role they fill, there's not really a whole ton of weapons that you'd see these sort of things leapfrog one another. So in that sense, the more immediate adjustment could be something like adjusting the upgrade or crafting recipes in which they maybe require one less component or one slightly less rare component. Something like that. One thing that was interesting though was the topic of legendary guns for PvP, because if you do look at the on-offer legendary weapons we have right now, obviously they're incredibly hard to find, as they should be. They're legendary weapons, they have to require a large task to get it, i.e. Matriarch and Queen cores, so it's definitely something that is the conscious, hey, this is a high risk, potentially high reward weapon, but the sort of bracket they all fall in, none of them are really built for PvP, but instead are those weapons you want to take in to take down those queens, those matriarchs, and other larger arc enemies, and other situational use cases. But the question was asked, do you think we'll see legendary guns meant for PvP? And this then gives some clarity on some of the design philosophy for weapons in relation to raider-on-raider combat. Watkins said, I think it's completely possible, although I'm very staunchly going to stick to there should never be a one-shot situation if you're wearing a shield and have full health. I think that gameplay is deeply boring, to just be deleted in an instant in our type of game. If we were trying to do something that is substantially stronger in PvP, it needs to come with the appropriate price tag, running costs, and risk. I'm not in any way against players having that spike in power and feeling cool for a moment, but it can't be like, I unlock this thing, now I just win fights. And that, again, I think is a very healthy philosophy for how these types of things happen. Obviously, there should be some high risk, high reward for going for these things. The risk, of course, being that you have to fight the queen, the matriarch, to get these reactors and other, in the future, higher archetypes and their components to craft something that would be a higher tier item. But at the same time, it also shouldn't guarantee you that imbalance in a straight up 1v1 gunfight. So, of course, all of these are high level design philosophy decisions that are being discussed. These aren't going to guarantee that we see these in the next week or so here, but it's interesting to hear that in the future, those plans are definitely open. And when it comes to other open plans here, one thing that for players that like to PvP, a lot of the stuff comes down to, okay, are you really risking it for what your sort of earning potential is? Because while in theory, your more aggressive players are going to get matched up with more aggressive players based off their matchmaking, those aggressive players likely bringing in things for combat, usually being some higher tier items, it's not always guaranteed. Like, you still definitely could have somebody that just goes in aggressively with a free kit and potentially takes out a fully kitted player, which is part of the beauty of an extraction shooter here at this. But at the same time, on the opposite side of that coin, if you go in for aggression and you're only finding people that end up having free kits, it's kind of like you're wasting your gear, and you may end up, depending on what you bring in, may end up going out of there negative even if you extract safely as a result. To which the idea of high tier loot raids is always something that's been presented. Watkins said, we discussed a lot of different criteria for queuing up, and of course there's other examples out there like the labs in Escape from Tarkov needing a special item to get in. Firstly stating, I think for the moment we don't want to segment the player base too much, but rounding out his quote on this saying, I completely get the sentiment. You have to feel like, yeah, I'm coming in loaded and I know everybody else is there going to be loaded, and let's have that moment for us rather than this dude with a Stitcher dropping from the ceiling randomly on us. Something as discussed in a little back and forth, not question related, but saying that they're just upping the ante. So that prospect of a higher tier loot raid is certainly not off the table, it's just right now not there in the immediate forefront. And finally, the last thing that I think could be very good in relation to how the weapon economy sort of works within Arc Raiders is the mention of new loadout options. It was asked, do you think we'll see saved loadouts where I can register that I want this gun, this bag, these consumables, and it crafts it for me? To which Watkins said, I won't speak for the UI or UX team on that, but I think that's a completely valuable thing where it just attempts to do its best job to fulfill your request with your loadout. It's like, well, you're short on this resource and that resource, here's what you can get, that type of thing. We've already done what we can to get the matchmaking and stuff as fast as possible. So if we can, not to say to keep you out of the front end, but get you through the front end faster, I think that's a great ambition too. Because you're like, let's get back in there. And you know, there's points in the game where friction is good and spending time is good and making you attentive is good, but looking through a bunch of menus isn't necessarily it. So that, I can greatly agree with that sentiment on. This has been one of those things that players have asked for in a lot of different feedback areas for quite some time, but I didn't realize until recently just how long I've spent in menus that I'm like, no, this would be a great thing to have. Like, I get that as a content creator, I do a lot of B-roll recording for videos and such with menu footage, but I'm talking like dozens and dozens of hours of difference between what's reported as time spent topside versus my time spent in-game on Steam. Even with a bug that I had at launch with Steam not really closing my application down, so like for a few additional hours on a few occasions where I didn't realize, oh, Steam says this game's still running. But having the ability to just simply craft things from a sort of pre-made build that you have set up for yourself, That'd be incredibly beneficial and something that I think doesn't do any harm to anybody, and is just, even if you don't take advantage of that, a great feature to end up having. So when we talk about the sort of future for the weapon economy and how things work in the future, whether near or far, Embark is very conscious of what a lot of people are looking forward to and a lot of sort of concerns and feedback that players have had since launch, which is definitely nice. Obviously, things like weapon balance are a lot easier to get out in the immediate future, where other things like user interfaces and other economical balances in terms of crafting, that's obviously stuff that's a little bit more high level and takes some more time. So when we look at 2026 as a whole, who knows when these will be coming, if these changes do come at all. But I think it should be noted for something that these are definitely areas the developers are conscious of and are willing to make adjustments in. So what do you think of the weapon economy that we have right now? Do you think some weapons outweigh others in relation to like they're way too cheap and overperform versus how others should? Do you think we should see a rebalancing in some of the rarities, some of the crafting items? Would you like to see high tier loot raids be a thing? What do you think of loadout options? All of what we discussed here, let me know. But that's where we're gonna wrap it up. So if you guys enjoyed the video, you found it at all insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on it. And of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so it's a single thing running all things Arc Raiders and more FPS content. I'd love to have you in the community. There's still so much I'm loving about this game and very much so having a fun time covering. So would love to have you guys in the community. But for now, thanks so much for watching. My name's been Espresso. I'll see you later. Take care and peace.